Gary
Here we
Gensler,
go.
new sheriff in town, the revenge of the SEC. So much to talk about with Gary Gensler. Maybe we should start here. Gary Gensler did an interview with the Washington Post called "The Way Forward: Cryptocurrency." I don't know if you got a chance to watch this interview, but I know you saw this clip. Any high-level takes on this before we get into the detail?
Yeah, it feels very much like nanny Gary Gensler, like coming into our industry and taking care of us and making sure we're super duper protected and we have all the regulations. It's weird that he was really asking for like more transparency out of the financial products that he sees in crypto. I'm like, dude, like how much more transparency do you want? Literally, it's a public ledger. You can't get any more transparent. Like what are you actually asking for? And so it seems to be like he's just using all of these very basic words to convince people that don't know about crypto that the SEC needs to regulate crypto.
There's definitely been an anti-Gary Gensler, anti-SEC vibe that's going on in cryptos because the SEC feels like it's increasingly combative with the industry, right? Like canceling Coinbase lend accounts and removing its ability to come to market. And this is kind of another step. What I think is interesting is Gary chose not to, at least for this specific interview. I'm glad he's engaging, but he chose to do it in the Washington Post, which is like hardcore institutional media, right? A lot of other crypto media organizations that would love to talk to him, Bankless included. So if Gary or anyone from the SEC is listening, we'd love to have Gary on the podcast to talk more about these crypto-specific issues. But this was very much for the Washington Post audience. And like kind of the institutions, even the interviewer. I felt like, I don't know, David, did you watch did you get a chance to watch the full interview?
No, I haven't. No, but
so I watched the video and I had like a few notes, a few takes on this. You want to hear them?
Absolutely, hit me.
All right, so like the first is, I think everyone who's listening to this has to realize that Gary Gensler knows his shit. Like he knows his shit from a technical perspective. So at MIT, he was a professor at MIT and he taught about crypto and blockchain courses. And I saw a number of those courses. He knows what he's talking about. He knows his way around the technology. He knows enough to be dangerous in this space. And his feedback in this interview was, I find the technology very interesting. He says this, I do think this technology is interesting. It's pushing central banks, he said. It's pushing fintech. That's why he chose to teach it at MIT. So he thinks the technology is like maybe academically interesting, and he thinks that it's a catalyst for change, which he seemed to appreciate. So I guess maybe that's the good side. One other thing that I think came through in this conversation is he's definitely not interested in sitting back. So he wants to be ultra proactive. It kind of is like, hey, Jay Clinton was the old sheriff. He did some stuff, not a lot, but there's a new sheriff in town, crypto, and I plan to get ahead of some of these issues. He mentioned that a number of times. He said this quote, I don't think technologies last long except outside the public policy. Okay. And I feel like he has badged himself and made it part of his mission to bring crypto into public policy, to like merge those things together, even if like the policy isn't ready for crypto, or maybe the policy was written in the 1930s and does not pertain or needs to be rewritten. I don't think he quite sees it like that. He wants to see a merging, so he intends to be really proactive.
Okay, those are all interesting takes. I'm worried that Gary Gensler doesn't actually want to talk to crypto people. I think he wants to stay inside of his own comfort zone when it comes to media. I remember hearing about how he used the term stable value coins when he was referring to stable coins, and people were speculating that that was alluding to stable value funds, which are an SEC regulated product. And so I think he's being very strategic with what he says and where he says it. And my suspicion is that if he were to come on a show like Bankless or any other crypto show, he would not be in like friendly territory, right? He wouldn't have the freedom to craft these narratives because we would totally call him out on some stuff, We would drill down into specifics. We would ask the questions that we would want to ask, and he would not have the home field advantage. So I'm worried that like Gary only broadcasts to the crypto industry, but doesn't actually come and join us.
Well, what's interesting is like, and definitely actions speak louder than words, but his words are actually the opposite of that, David. So in the conversation he was having with the interviewer of the Washington Post, he said this: "Our door is open, but people aren't coming in." It's kind of like, hey, industry, crypto industry, you guys are a bunch of like cowboys. Like, I understand what you're doing is like technologically disruptive, but if you want to do something, come and ask. Door is open. Just like come ask our permission. We'll have a good faith talk about it, and then you'll be off on your way, and it'll all be fine. So he very much maintains a posture of the door is open, but it's like you're saying, actions speak louder than words. And if he was serious about opening the door, he would do what Hester Pierce did, I think, what some CFTC commissioners in the past have done. It's just like show up at crypto conferences, right? Engage the community, talk to us. I mean, we're not criminals. We're not hucksters. We're not like trying to defraud people. We're trying to grow a better, more transparent, open financial system for the world. I think there are some shared goals. One of the goals he went back to in that conversation, David, was like, the interviewer asked, why does the SEC exist? And it's like, to protect investors. Like he said it. I'd love to dive into what he thinks that means, right? Because like crypto has a shared goal of like wanting to create better conditions for investors as well. But the SEC's like way forward means protecting investors from like 4% yield on a Coinbase Lend account, right? Like, is that really protecting investors? But one of the things the reason I watched the full interview too is I was trying to figure out, like, new cop on the beat. He said that they have robust authorities over crypto and they're going to use them. These are some of his words. It's like I was trying to figure out, where's the SEC going to target next? And it felt to me, if you read between the lines, and you sort of inferred some of this too, is if you raised money, if you're an ICO, like look out, okay? Number one. So if you raised money from unaccredited investors in the US, I think you have a target on your back. Number two, stablecoins, I feel like have a target on their back as well. I'm not sure how that's going to play out. I think that's going to be a combination of SEC plus Treasury trying to take some sort of action. Maybe it'll require congressional, like new legislation through that process. But I think that's got sort of a target on its back, particularly centralized stablecoins, right? So the USDCs of the world. And the third area is lending and staking, which he didn't get into a lot. But like those three areas, I feel like have targets on their back. And particularly, he kept using the term platforms, which I think means more centralized exchanges, centralized entities. Yep. So the Coinbases and Geminis and BlockFis of the world. Less so decentralized finance. He actually said something positive about decentralized finance being a catalyst for change. But if I was in those three areas, I would be like relatively worried, I guess.
Yeah, no, I do think that the SEC is kind of like prepping for bigger and bigger moves when it comes to the crypto world.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he's clearly sort of an institutionalist. I don't think this is the end of the world, right? I think there'll be some enforcement actions, but like at the end of the day, it'll be fine. I do feel like, David, the crypto is kind of like DDoS attacking the regulators, right? So like, how do you bring thousands of tokens like to court? And like, do you even have the staff to go do that, right? Maybe this goes to a conversation we'll talk about a little bit later. But this was also interesting. At the same time, this conversation about crypto was published in the Washington Post. Gary Gensler tweeted this right after, which was an appeal to freshmen in college or any college student to start saving early and start saving regularly, right? So if you stock away $5 a week, 8% yield, I guess that's investing in the stock market. By the time you're 65, you'll have $100,000, right? I think this felt to many in crypto like the wrong time for this sort of, this sort of appeal to millennials and Gen Z. What's your take on this?
Yeah, I generally have more nefarious thoughts about this because, like, he's saying like, hey, just save $5 a week. All you got to do is save $5 a week. The United States printed 26% of all outstanding dollars last year, and so like, if we want to view like the value that changes the value of what you save. And when he's saying like, save $5 a week, what he's saying is, hey, put $5 a week into your bank account so the banks can go get the yield, right? And this is what banks do. They take your money and then they get even more yield on it, and they don't give you back all of the yield that they get. They keep it for themselves. And so like Gary Gensler, who like you said is an institutionalist, to me he's just advocating, he's like indoctrinating all of these young folks in the world to like be a part of the banking system, which has cut out so many returns from so many of its customers for the last for decades, and so it's very much the opposite of the values that I stand for, and it's the same advice that we've heard for the last 30 years, and I think there's a lot of institutions out there that are taking advantage of the fact that like this is the quote unquote like formal advice. So like, oh yeah, save $5 a week. That's not working for people. It hasn't been working for people.
It just feels like an elite baby boomer take on this, right?
Yeah.
It's like millennials, if only stop spending money on coffee, and he actually mentioned coffee and avocado toast, right? And just save your money and put it in the bank account, right? Then you too could be rich one day, right? It's like nothing against long-term thinking and saving, but like, the reason I don't think it's actually effective indoctrination, David, is because college students aren't dumb, right? They're looking at a 0.01% interest rate in their savings account, and they're going like, how?
Right.
Like why? How? And they're looking at the stock market, right? And 8% average maybe over the long run, but they evaluate stocks versus crypto, and what do you think they're buying? So, I think Gary Gensler is about to have a bunch of college students who are like asking questions about crypto during his office hours, rather than people asking, how they can save their money and put it in a bank account. It just feels like patronizing. I don't know. It's like crypto is the largest opportunity for our generation, for millennials. For Gen Z, and to not acknowledge that it even exists or that it's viable, and to like crack down on it without giving viable alternatives, I think is terrible. It's short-sighted.
Absolutely. Yep.
It's frustrating. It's annoying, and no wonder they're getting some pushback on this stuff.
Yeah, and this is why literally every other generation gets frustrated by the boomers, right? Because the boomers just think that because it worked for my generation, it'll work for your generation too, forgetting that like the boomers haven't let go of all of the institutions that made their generation one of the wealthiest generations of all time. And so, like I said, it's very, very nefarious where he's cracking down on Coinbase lens products while he's saying, oh yeah, save $5, but meanwhile, don't look at this crypto thing, save $5 a week. And like you said, he's talked about like, hey, instead of going out for coffee, you can make coffee at home. All right, so you're just going to suck the joy out of life? Like, hey, like coffee at the coffee shop tastes better. And he's saying like, no, suffer and save so you can put the money in the banks.
I mean, we haven't even addressed like student debt and the rising costs of going to university, which is like a whole nother can of worms. But let's keep going because we're not done with the SEC story. Another thing that happened while you were there was an attendee, actually a speaker at the Messari mainnet
at the mainnet conference, right?
The mainnet conference was actually served papers, right, subpoenaed by the SEC. There's some conversation like we don't know who this person was. Some say it's one of the founders of the Terra chain, Do Kwon, I believe. Others, like there's some conflicting reports about that. It almost doesn't matter. It's like, wow, the SEC actually, when they show up at a crypto conference, they show up to serve someone papers.
Right.
That's an interesting message. Do you think there was some signal about this?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, even if they didn't intend for that signal to be signaled, they should still understand what they're doing, right? Like maybe they didn't intend to intimidate everyone, but that was the net outcome of what they did, right? And so regardless, it's an intentional choice.
Was that the vibe at Messari? Were people like, oh shit, like SEC just...
People are still coming to terms with it. There wasn't
Okay.
too much conversation about it, but I do know that Ryan Selkis was like fired up.
Well, let's look at his tweet. But before we do, Jake says this: 2 reasons the SEC might do this. This is Jake Travinsky. The target lives outside of the U.S. and is hard to serve at home. But the SEC knew they'd be in New York City and took advantage of the chance for a personal service. Or number 2, the SEC wanted everyone to see this happen live to send a message or intimidate the industry. That second one is particularly concerning. This is what Ryan Selkis said. Why don't you read it out, David?
Yeah, Ryan says, if you're wondering when I actually decided to run for Senate, it's when these effers came to my event, didn't buy a ticket, and served one of the speakers a subpoena. Enough talk. More war on our out-of-control regulatory state. Ryan was definitely like feeling himself at this conference. First off, it was a fantastic conference, a huge success. And it's the conference that Ryan Selkis, who's the person like leading the charge into trying to reform governance, reform our politics.
Create more
about
transparency, right? Too.
Right. Yeah, totally. And so like, it's kind of ironic that like the guy that cares the most about this issue was throwing a conference and the SEC showed up to serve one of his speakers there. He follows up this tweet saying, Selkis 2024, time to activate the crypto political machine.
Do you think he's actually going to run for Senate?
I hope so.
I mean, we need more crypto native people in the halls of our government. This is kind of the bottom line. This is the only way this is going to change. Either we convert them and convince them and show them the values of crypto, or someone crypto native actually enters their turf. I hope he does something like this. Definitely a lot of messages happening from the SEC. I guess this last one, this was kind of a quiet dropping from Coinbase, but apparently Coinbase formally dropped their planned lend program. This is a program to lend out crypto assets like Bitcoin and ETH. Stuff like this happens at Celsius and BlockFi and Gemini, but they plan to drop it after the SEC warning. So some terms of service, I guess, were updated to say that. So the SEC basically scared Coinbase into not offering a 4% yield account to retail investors, which, rather than not have your coffee, would be a good way for college kids to save money invest in the future.
On a fintech app on their phone where they're comfortable with, no less. I'm kind of bummed that Coinbase didn't take this opportunity to take the fight to the SEC. But
who
maybe
knows, though,
there's something
right?
in the background.
They could be playing some different type of game. Who knows how they're playing it? It seemed very clear, at least from their social indications, that Coinbase does intend to fight in some way. So we'll see how that shapes up.